At a time of political polarization and unprecedented attacks on the press, I look around the world to see who is getting it right. And that road more often leads to Marty Baron. Few are doing more to build trust in media institutions and hold the powerful accountable than the journalists who have had the privilege of working with Marty, whether at the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the New York Times, or the LA Times, or where he got his start back at the Miami Herald. Marty Baron's pursuit of what lurks in the shadows has led investigative journalists to uncover some of the biggest stories of our time. I have the privilege of having exchanges with Marty from time to time. We see each other. And we've had a couple of conversations. But I think I sum it up with a simple maxim that he once said to me in an email. He said, "David, we have been handed a test, and we must pass it." Please watch the video.
When we heard that Marty Baron was coming to the Boston Globe, I think the first thing we wanted to do was vet the guy and make sure that he was who he said he was. And I don't think Marty knows this to this day. But I did call Lehigh University and make sure that he had the 2 degrees that he said he had.
It was sort of like a wariness and a skepticism. How can somebody who doesn't know Boston, doesn't even like the Red Sox, how can someone like that possibly lead a paper?
I think we learned through our clergy sex abuse project that Marty not being from Boston is what made him incredibly valuable because he had these fresh eyes.
Liev, I think, captured Marty perfectly for that time.
There really is nothing worse than playing someone who's alive. It's a lot of responsibility. It felt like to me, I was not looking forward to it at all. And so I took a train down to Washington, D.C. to meet Marty, and it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life.
He's not a backslapper who parades around the newsroom. He is cerebral and a taskmaster in the best way, with high standards.
What I identified within him was a kind of actual shyness that I really would have never expected.
Marty is very reserved. He leans on the quiet side. In some ways, his reserve and his not being the most sociable editor helped us because he was unconflicted when it came to holding powerful people accountable, because he didn't have relationships with them that would make him hesitate whether to be aggressive in our coverage.
I gotta say, I think the greatest thing about Marty Baron, and this is kind of the secret to how he does his job so successfully at so many papers, is Marty he's a set of values, and he's very clear about what they are. He's very clear about what he personally stands for. He's very clear about what journalism stands for.
Morality and truth, right? It's a weird kind of profession where you're serving your readers, but you're also taking the risk of pissing them off. And not everybody gets that. He does get that.
He knew how to preserve the journalism when other editors gave up.
My relationship with him is also personal. I have this respect for him as an editor. And when two editors are running competing papers, you also have it's a very odd dynamic. I very much want him to succeed, but not more than my paper.
He was the first editor of the Globe who didn't come up through the Globe system.
He went to 3 different papers as executive editor: Miami, Boston, and the Washington Post. In each one, he managed to find the story and lead on the story that would elevate the paper. Newspaper editors run their papers through big stories, but he's run each of those 3 papers through the biggest, most complicated stories you can imagine, and I think that's remarkable.
Marty has devoted his life to journalism, and it is his first and enduring love.
We have this joke that we're going to retire together, and because we do so much stuff to get panels together and stuff, we're going to make a living doing our shtick on nursing homes. We're going to do weddings, and we're going to do bar mitzvahs.
The reporting that the Post has done, along with the New York Times, on Trump has been outstanding in the face of all kinds of obstacles thrown up by Trump himself.
Very few people hold their journalists and themselves to the standards that Marty does. It's so important what we think news is these days, or what we believe, or who we trust.
We need to find a way to clone him so that every decent newspaper in the country can have a leader who has a vision, who understands the importance of news, who is disinterested in the bottom line, who wants people to be well informed, who wants the powerful to be held accountable, who wants democracy to survive and prosper because people know what's going on in their communities. And that's the challenge for the future. And if we can only find leaders of the caliber of Marty Baron, we can get there.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating this year's Special Citation recipient, Marty Baron.
Thank you all very much. I know I'm up against a very hard deadline. We'll see what I can do. You're really pushing it here. Thank you, David, for the introduction. Thanks to all the folks on the screen. They've been wonderful to me. You know, Liev, I met him when he came to the Washington Post to interview me, to mostly just observe me. And you can tell from Spotlight what a tremendous job he did capturing my sense of humor. So it really is an honor to be up here with all of the other winners, and particularly to follow Maria Ressa, who is distinguished for her courage and her persistence. And I think it's really important that over the next year, over the years to come, that we stand beside her and behind her every step of the way. I've been in the profession for 43 years, and I've been privileged to work with immensely talented and dedicated journalists in newsrooms that I have led as the top editor: the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and the Miami Herald, as well as in the two others where I ended up in senior positions, the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. Each of us in a newsroom possesses individual strengths, yet the greatest accomplishments of our institutions invariably require a collective effort. And I, as much as anyone, have been the beneficiary of the superb work of others. Accepting an award, such as the one this evening, reinforces my gratitude toward those I have had as colleagues, and reinforces as well my admiration for their ambitious, groundbreaking, and routinely courageous work. I also want to express my admiration and gratitude to individuals outside our organizations, those who reach out to us in the press with revelatory information, hoping that doing so will serve the public good. At times, this might be someone with confidential information on a national security matter. Those individuals take great personal and professional risks to inform citizens about wrongdoing or abuse of power by their governments. Their bravery is, almost always, motivated by concern for country. At other times, as in the Boston Globe's investigation of the Catholic Church, individuals open up their lives so that a pernicious evil can be exposed. They are frequently and understandably uncertain that we in the press will listen with the generosity and empathy they deserve. They can't be sure we will be sensitive to them or that we will be serious about getting at the truth. Vulnerable as they may be, they come to us out of a determination to see justice done, out of faith that speaking to us is worth a try, and with hope that others will not have to endure what they did. Without the survivors of abuse who spoke with Boston Globe journalists, our investigation would have faltered. To do our work properly required them to open up old and deep wounds, yet they found the strength to do so. They had held on to the truth for years, indignant that it had been suppressed. The church had covered up heinous acts for a half-century, at least. Other institutions that were supposed to listen to survivors did not, or responded to their pain with inattention, indifference, inertia, or callousness. By telling their stories to the Globe, there was at least the prospect of accountability. It was important we do right by them, and by others who had suffered as they did, but had yet to come forward. Let me tell you about a moment in the aftermath of that Boston Globe investigation and the movie Spotlight that portrayed it. It is a moment I shall not forget, a moment for me that maintains a vivid resonance in the present. It happened a little over 3 years ago during a screening of Spotlight at my alma mater, Lehigh University. During the Q&A session, a man rose to the microphone to speak. "It was a very hard movie for me to watch," he said. "I tried to see it a couple of times. I only got to the parking lot and turned around. I'm 80+ years old. I was sexually abused by a priest in 1947. I was 11. I live with it every day. I was fatherless. I didn't know if anybody would believe me. I never spoke about it. My wife passed away many years ago. She never knew about it. It was in 47 he molested me, and he was ordained in 1947. Not a day goes by," he said, "that I don't have to live with this. I never spoke it, like I said, thank you, till it broke in Boston, and then I started talking about it. I do go to therapy," he continued. "I took my children with me, so they do understand, and they fully support me, and I thank you very much." I think about that gentleman when I hear our president say, "The press is the enemy of the American people." He did not see us as the enemy. He saw us as an ally. Finally, he had one. Other survivors of abuse and their families and friends feel the same. And so do many others who have had journalists listen to them when no one else would, giving power to those who had none in the cause of fair treatment. They were grateful for journalists who sought to get at the truth when people in authority had trampled on it or concealed it. Today, we face another threat, perhaps even more subversive. This one is to the very idea of truth itself. In the United States, it began as a calculated assault on our profession, though it has not ended there. It has gone on for more than 4 years now, during presidential primaries, a general election, and past the halfway mark of a presidency. First, there was an effort to marginalize the press, and then to delegitimize us. Then there was a campaign to dehumanize us as disgusting and scum and garbage and the lowest form of life. Ultimately, we were depicted as fake news, enemies of the people, a stain on the country, traitors. There is no mystery as to why this is happening. It is a cynical strategy to disqualify the press as an independent arbiter of fact. But we in the press are not the only targets. The aim is to disqualify other institutions and professions as arbiters of fact, too. The courts, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, historians, even scientists. Under assault are all the elements that help us determine what is factual: evidence, expertise, experience. They are being devalued or dismissed or denied. And the goal is evident: to obliterate the idea of objective truth. Before the 2016 election, Leslie Stahl of CBS News went to Trump Tower to meet with candidate Donald Trump. At one point, after he started into his familiar harangue about the media, she asked him why he persisted in leveling such attacks. As she tells it, he said, "You know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all, so when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you." It was a moment of startling but revealing honesty. That is, in fact, the president's goal. No one should believe the media if we contradict him. The public should believe only one person: him alone, and 100% of the time. Bret Stephens, the conservative columnist, put it perfectly in a speech in early 2017 when he was at the Wall Street Journal before he joined the New York Times op-ed page. The president, he said, is trying to substitute propaganda for news, boosterism for information. His objection, he said, is to objectivity itself. He's perfectly happy for the media to be disgusting and corrupt, so long as it's on his side. Stephens spoke of our obligation, quote, "not to look around or beyond or away from the facts, but to look straight at them, to recognize and call them for what they are, nothing more or less, to see things as they are before we reinterpret them into what we'd like them to be, to speak the truth irrespective of what it means for our popularity or influence." That is good counsel for journalists, for all citizens too. If we come to feel the truth is unknowable, mission accomplished. People just believe what they would like to believe. If we conclude that everyone is lying for selfish reasons, mission accomplished as well. Then it doesn't matter if our leaders are being untruthful, as long as they serve our individual interests. If in the United States we now believe truth can only come from the head of state, then we have surrendered the entirely contrary idea that inspired the founding of our nation. The president apparently has not been content to vilify the press with malicious and menacing language, nor has he been content to cynically undermine the idea that there are facts and truth independent of what he would like them to be, or just declares them to be. Several weeks ago, his administration, through the U.S. Department of Justice, sought to effectively criminalize common practices in journalism that have long served the public interest. The latest 18-count indictment of Julian Assange under the Espionage Act of 1917 presents a grave threat to customary day-to-day reporting of national security matters. The indictment accuses Assange of seeking, receiving, and then publishing classified material. As Kerry DeSalle, an attorney with the Knight First Amendment Institute, put it, that's exactly what good national security and investigative journalists do every day. These charges, she said, could be brought against national security and investigative journalists simply for doing their jobs and doing them well. Dating as far back as the Pentagon Papers in 1971, when Daniel Ellsberg provided the New York Times and then the Washington Post highly secret documents that revealed a history of government deceit about the Vietnam War, Journalists have been receiving and reporting on classified information. More recently, the Washington Post and The Guardian published classified information obtained by Edward Snowden to disclose a global surveillance program that represented a breathtaking intrusion with scant oversight and no public debate into the privacy of US citizens and individuals worldwide. When this expansive new indictment against Assange was announced, an official for the Department of Justice said it takes seriously the role of journalists in our democracy, and that, quote, it is not and never has been the department's policy to target them for reporting. But the legal theory leveled against Assange could easily be weaponized against journalists. It is hard to escape the conclusion that the administration's intent is to intimidate the entirety of the American press. First we get Assange, next we might come after you. And all of this is made worse by government officials' continuing pattern of overclassifying information, often for no reason other than to shield themselves from scrutiny. And it could be made still worse by the Trump administration's fondness for invoking national security and declaring national emergencies. If steel and car imports from our allies can be labeled threats to US national security, it does not require much imagination to envision this US government classifying vast new categories of information as national security secrets. For the press, already subjected to incessant attack, this poses a new and sobering challenge. But we cannot be intimidated. If we fail to do our jobs for fear of retribution, we will betray the spirit of the First Amendment. James Madison, principal author of the First Amendment, wrote of, quote, the right of freely examining public characters and measures. That right is still ours, thankfully, and it will mean nothing if we do not exercise it with vigor and tenacity. Anthony Lewis, the late New York Times columnist and First Amendment scholar, once wrote words we should live by today. The American press has been given extraordinary freedom by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the First Amendment. In return, it owes society courage. We at the Washington Post understand our role in a democracy, and I can say this with confidence. We will meet our obligations. Thank you again for inviting me.